Welcome to this explainer. Think about it for a second. Do we actually know the things we're most familiar with? We go through our daily lives tossing around words like right, duty, God, or being. We use them so often, we just kind of assume we understand them perfectly. But Hegel challenges this everyday assumption right out of the gate. He argues that mere familiarity, that's not the same as true knowledge.
And hey, if you've ever found reading philosophy frustrating, you are in incredibly good company. Hegel himself actually noted that ordinary thinking finds conceptual thought annoying and troublesome. He totally knew that we get extremely comfortable in our everyday mental habits. Breaking out of those habits to truly grasp reality takes real effort, and frankly, it can be a bit of a headache.
So let's dive right into our roadmap. We'll hit the limits of ordinary thought, compare metaphor with logic, look at isolated parts versus organic wholes, contrast static images with active concepts, and finally, weigh familiarity against true knowledge. Think of this whole explanation as a dialectical ascent. We're climbing from comfortable, everyday thoughts all the way up to the living truth of rigorous philosophy. All right, step 1, breaking out of the everyday and exploring the limits of ordinary thought. To really understand Hegel, we have to start with what he calls Vorstellung. In English, this usually gets translated as a figurative idea or mental representation. Basically, it's the familiar, ordinary way we usually think. It's a pictorial idea based heavily on our sensory perception and everyday language. When you think of a dog, a house, or even a big idea like justice, you probably form a mental picture in your head, right? It's exactly what Hegel calls materialized thinking. Now, contrast that immediately with our ultimate destination, Begriff. This is translated as the notion or the concept, and it's the purely logical, rational, and active essence of the subject matter. It completely leaves those mental pictures and physical senses behind. Moving from that figurative idea to the concept is the absolute fundamental distinction in Hegel's philosophy. It's the big leap from ordinary, sensuous thinking over to rigorous scientific philosophy. Which brings us to our second point, escaping the senses, by comparing sensory metaphors with logical essences. Let's make this concrete. Take the figurative idea of representing God as a father. This relies entirely on a sensory metaphor, doesn't it? It uses a very human, physical relationship to express a spiritual truth. But contrast that with the notion, say, the pure idea of being. The concept of being doesn't have a face, or a shape, or a color. It's entirely abstract. It's non-empirical. It is the logical essence stripped of absolutely all sensory input. As Hegel so brilliantly writes, figurative ideas are materialized thinking, the metaphors of thoughts. Now, metaphors are incredibly useful for getting us through the day and communicating basic ideas. We all use them. But for Hegel, because they are so tethered to the material world and our physical senses, they ultimately fall short of pure philosophical truth. To use another metaphor, they're just the shadows on the cave wall. Moving on to step 3, connecting the dots between isolated parts and the organic whole. It's super fascinating how these two modes of thought actually structure the world. Every day, ordinary thinking tends to isolate and separate its contents. Ideas are kind of cut adrift in these vague mental spaces, connected only by the simple word and, like God and the world, or right and duty. But the notion, the concept, is fundamentally holistic and organic. It brings differences together as interacting activities or processes, where each part is identical with the whole and literally contains the others within itself. So the absolutely crucial point here is that for Hegel, the notion isn't just some mental category stuck in our heads. He calls it the soul of the concrete and the very heart of things. It's the invisible, unifying life force inside concrete reality that makes things what they actually are. It's not just a subjective lens we use to look at the world. It's the objective structure of the world itself. Now for point 4, finding the living truth by moving from static images to active concepts. Think about how we normally operate day to day. Figurative ideas are usually treated super passively. We view them as static, dead things we just kind of have. They function like labeled boxes that we pull off a shelf to categorize whatever material the outside world throws at us. In this mode, the knowing subject, you or me, acts as this totally quiescent passive base. But the notion is radically different. It's an active, self-moving, and dialectical force. It's infinite. It doesn't just sit there waiting to be used, it's actively doing work. Watch how this plays out using Hegel's famous botanical analogy. Step 1 is the seed. It already contains the entire program, the implicit concept of the plant. Step 2 is the unfolding. The concept develops dialectically, moving through its own internal contradictions and externalizing itself. And then step 3 is the plant itself, the fulfilled organic whole. The concept constantly unfolds just like a plant growing from a seed. It is a living, breathing circle of development. And that brings us to our final step, the ultimate ascent, moving from mere familiarity to true knowledge. Let's loop back to that question we asked at the very beginning. Just because an idea is familiar, what Hegel calls bekannt, doesn't actually mean we truly know it. Familiar representations are just the common coin of daily life. They're the words we throw around without reflecting on their true meaning. True knowledge, on the other hand, what he calls erkannt, means we've actually grasped the scientifically understood truth of the notion. But making this leap, it is not easy. Philosophy's task, Hegel warns us, requires the strenuous toil of conceptual reflection. You can't just passively absorb the truth. Transforming those comfortable, familiar mental pictures into active, living concepts takes serious, rigorous, and, sometimes really uncomfortable intellectual effort. You essentially have to actively break down your own everyday assumptions. To really cement this and bring it all together, just look at how radically these two approaches differ. In form, we're shifting from pictorial and sensory straight to purely logical. In structure, we move from isolated fragments to holistic, organic unity. And in nature, we go from static and dead to active, self-moving, and dialectical. Whenever you dive into Hegel, you've got to constantly check yourself and ask, am I thinking in pictures right now, or am I thinking in pure concepts? So why does all of this matter at the end of the day? Because mastering this specific transition from ordinary sensuous thinking to rigorous scientific philosophy is literally the gateway to unlocking Hegel's entire view of reality. If you try to unpack his massive philosophical systems using just your everyday mental pictures, you are going to end up completely frustrated. You absolutely have to step into the realm of the active concept. Which leaves us with a final, pretty provocative question for you to chew on as you navigate your own life, your learning, and your worldview. Are you just relying on static, comfortable labeled boxes, or are you willing to do the strenuous toil of conceptual reflection? The living truth is out there, for sure, but you have to be willing to make the climb.